All right, we are going to start part 2 of our evening. So if you could return to your seats, that would be greatly appreciated. All right. Okay, so welcome back everyone, and hello to our audience on Zoom. Before I introduce our featured poets, please remember that we're calling for poems written in response to the poetry of the season's featured poets. Caitlin Press will be publishing After Poems in Dialogue, a Canadian anthology of response poetry, edited by Kieran Regier and Zoe Dickinson. So you can read more or submit via our website at planetearthpoetry.com. So, our first featured reader is Thomas Doerksen, a poet, philosopher, and scientist based here in Victoria. Motivated by the climate crisis and growing wealth inequality, his poetry balances conceptual novelty, musicality, and a compassionate attention for human and non-human alike. Let's welcome Thomas to the mic.
They cast a spell on this world to make magic impossible. When the pigeon flew into the gym, the men only lifted more weights. The pigeon waited on the stairs for you. You held your towel like a muleta, not to deceive the sleek gray neck, the simple eyes, but to shroud, defend. That was magic. The way you cradled his wings and carried away a beak poking calmly from the white bundle. The way on the fire escape, you gave him a running start so he wouldn't stumble into the alley, so he'd shoot free from between the plaster walls. It was the same way in bed that first time you'd said your lilting secret. I feel like this isn't tall enough. Jane Hirschfield defines poetry as concentration in at least 3 senses: the focusing of attention, the condensation of meaning and image, and the intensification of sound and rhythm. In agreement with that, I think of poetry as meditation through language. I think by doing that, we give more value and worth to all those things that our society doesn't value or doesn't even talk about. And that includes those tiny non-human creatures that inhabit the earth, like the moths, the title of this next poem. Behind the glass panes of the bus stop, the giant moths beat at the starlight, beautiful and bare. When you leave for the home that we no longer share, I wonder if we ourselves could be like this, stuck in a dome of night. The sky itself as flat glass, as false panes. I wonder about us as persons, about moths with no names. One of the wonderful things about human relationships is how much time can be condensed into a single moment. Try and express this in the next poem. Family tree. Again, let's tell the old story, replant the family tree. Our parents' romance escapes under crimson flags, their love that lasts through photographs. History sinks into facelessness. Mennonites reap cabbage fields under each new regime for that same bowl of borscht. Where I stand under alder beams, more grandparents than parents, the photographs whisper. Before I was born, I was a cell not yet divided, folded into monochrome sepia figures on horse-drawn wagons. On the road through the forest steppe, a great uncle fought for his life against bandits and lost. Tied by time to his bones, we split into hundreds of bodies. That's the story until, at the edge of the pool, my brother sets a niece on my lap. She raises an eyebrow as if to say, "Look, uncle, I can cast spells." There is more progeny than parents all the way down. I'll read from the long poem in this collection, also called Through the Cities and the Woods. In the first part of this poem, the narrator articulates or sets out on archetypal mystic's journey, which is the quest for the self. And the second part, which I will read, the narrator encounters some of the consequences of committing to this journey. One day in the dark, I break knowledge, a lovely vase, to useless shards. I grip symbols that hang like rescue ropes in pitch black of life's roofless theater. There, I suspect it won't be me who wins life's big adventure, but the other me who's smiling, standing there. I run to center stage, put on a show, eat greasy hamburgers, snort at the jokes, with all who know me growing distant, hunched over in their dim bureaus, false names on doors. There in the backyard of the rental property, I watch for hours branches of the fallen tree get cut and stacked as gifts by muscles worn. None of it's home. And soon enough, I must start moving on. I flee from nightmares with great mastery by filing photographs in closets never to be seen again. I quiet my conviction that whatever now I am, stepped over ages, crossing millions of country evenings to reach this urban hour. I prepare my bed for sleep and plan the square grids of my days homogeneous as cakes. I find that I cannot smile within this labyrinth of scenes. So I seek method. Outside of haunted labs, the sanguine churches, classrooms vacant. I hope for thought in the deep song of living. I sojourn in the colleges, in archives, study blueprints, talk particles with skeptics, use chalkboards to write questions as though their answers might elude me. I once believed in God, but not in angels. Now it is the opposite. I hear them sylph-like soaring in the heat of summer, while my God long ago prowled to another story. Each year I shed another mark of holiness. Bedtime prayers silenced, cushions stored away in drawers. Meditation, I watch it sign its name in rain, which slips from hands, falls on the bus stop, on the train. The lines that crease and cross my face. I cannot tell when I'd stopped reading metaphysics or stopped believing. My cozy years of searches for some hidden logic on the banks of rivers, they dissipate away. Happy, I dangle my feet over the edge of life, swirl with my toes the air where I once thought that there should be an audience, but there is no one here. I lean to whisper this into my darling the night's willing ear. If you want to see how the rest of that develops, you can take a look at the collection after. I'll read 2 more poems. Many of these are set in Victoria, and especially this next one. Dear strangers, you say 3 or 4 words with Ben while you lie skin to skin on the beach. Susie and Claire, nude, cuddle around him. I'm curious about you, he says. You never reply. Your mind wanders to barges in the strait. He sighs. You don't. Your warmth spreads so thinly over the mountains. Claire winks at you from under bed. Ben, eyelids in glitter. She was right. The ocean's not so cold when you hold up your hands. This last poem is called Time Taking. It's a sort of reminder that no matter how impatient our historical moment is, the world and all the non-human things in it have been and will always be incredibly patient with us and with the arc of time. It has 3 parts. 1, if there's one thing I believe in, it's time. It's time that has fused my habits into one person. It's the stuckness of being me that takes as long as the leaves take to fall to the foot of old oak. It's the chance to be me that moves with the moments that pile softly like soil. The 4 billion years it takes to make Earth, eternity's instant would do much worse. 2, suddenly a thought jabs its green scimitar through the loam. While night reclaims its rule, I thank the self for being me a while through every sleep and orbit. I thank the knotted grasses growing on beds of clay where deer have slept. I thank my friend, a priest, for prayer beads, his baking. I am just fine with evolutions in this one, this only universe. Even a mole that's pushing up a mound is quite enough. And out there in the dark, worms wriggle, waging wars already won. I think to the gnats, how proudly they stand on the prows of leaves, 1,000 miles from new fences, hot tubs, and decks. Of the hope in a beetle, of the dandelion, and, oh, silent budding. 3, one day under the autumn stars, whose eons earned each slow atomic tick it took to get here, the golden aster of the river valley will drape the mountains, and Arbutus will bridge planets with its sprawl. Wild river pike will swim through nebulae, granite will melt on tongues glittering warmly, and artificial minds will mine leftover cubes of empty space as freed awareness rides the thermals like hawks among cumuli. But for now, lava bulges sagely in the slowing dark, and the grass grows to keep our souls.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Our next featured reader is Kate Braid. Kate was writer-in-residence at Mabel Dodge Luhan House in Taos, New Mexico. She has written many books of poetry and creative nonfiction, including 2 memoirs of her 15 years as a carpenter, Journeywoman, Swinging a Hammer in a Man's World, and Hammer and Nail, Notes of a Journeywoman. Her latest book is The Erotics of Cutting Grass, a memoir from Caitlin Press. She currently lives on Pender Island and in Victoria, BC. Let's welcome up Kate.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks for having me. It was actually supposed to be Zoe Landale up here. And so thanks to Zoe too. She couldn't make it, alas. So I'm grateful that she, and to Karen, that you asked me to step in. Now the trick is that my new book, The Erotics of Cutting Grass, Reflections on a Well-Loved Life, isn't a poetry book. But Karen suggested I read the poetic parts. Thank you for your flexibility. So there are a few things in here where I've tried to do that. So what this is it's a series of short essays about the highs and the lows of a increasingly long life. And the first one, well, the second one actually, is about becoming a stepmother. I always vowed I did not want children. I was the oldest of 6, been there, done that. And then I fell in love with a man who had a 7-year-old. So I had to learn to become a stepmother. And we worked it out, mostly because he was a lovely kid. And this picks up when he was older. When Kevin was 37, married, and working as the administrator for a United Nations peacekeeping agency, he and his wife phoned us from New York to tell us they had just had a baby daughter. And the strangest thing happened. Every cell in my body realigned and I was a grandmother. I, who had never wanted my own kids, was profoundly changed. As if grandparenting is not merely a role, but a hormonal change. And for the next few years, it was me, the step-grandmother, not John, the real grandfather, who constantly pushed for us to go to New York to visit. But she's just a baby, John would say, after we'd returned from yet another visit. She can't even talk. But that was the point. It was the baby I wanted to see, to smell, to be with, to hold. I was her grandmother, no step about it. They called her Zlata, a Ukrainian name from her mother's side of the family, meaning golden. One night when we were visiting again in New York, I volunteered to babysit with her while her parents and grandfather were out, but the child wouldn't settle. She'd always had trouble falling asleep, but on this night she was particularly niggly. I tried walking her, singing to her, rocking her, putting her down, leaving her to cry, walking her some more. Finally, as a last resort, I stopped everything, laid her in her bed, and began to recite poetry. W.B. Yeats, The Second Coming. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, I began. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Perhaps it was the iambic pentameter of the piece, its regular rhythms and rhyme. Perhaps she was merely exhausted, but the child promptly fell asleep. She was a poet. In fact, as she grew up, she became an avid reader and excellent writer. And we sometimes joke about how in many ways she's most like me, more like me, a writer, than anyone else in the family. When Zlata was about 10, every student in her class had to draw up a family tree. And the teacher said, Zlata, you've made a mistake. You've drawn in 3 grandmothers. But that's right, the child said. I have 3 grandmothers. I was official. And this piece, it's from a short piece called Saying Hello to Fear, came out of writing that memoir that Sharon mentioned, the Journeywoman, Swinging a Hammer in a Man's World. That book took forever to write. And what it was just the story of day to day of being a woman in the days when that was extremely rare. I was always the only woman on the job. And I knew that we needed a record of that for young women and young men who wanted to know what it's like, how do I get along in this strange construction culture? But it wasn't working. And I'd been working on it at this point for about 20 years, so this is what happened. I'd come to accept that this memoir wanted to be written, had to be written for a larger audience, but still I was afraid, or as I would have said then, unsettled. Over the years of writing draft after draft, I tossed out the fiction version of the story and gone on to produce a long series of non-fiction versions. A cheery version, a preachy version, a scholarly one. But none held to my basic commitment to myself that this story must be not just true to facts, but emotionally honest. If anyone had asked, I couldn't have exactly explained what I meant by emotionally honest, but I was certain I'd know it in my writer's gut. Did know it for short passages when I wrote. But after 20 years of writing, none of my completed drafts were it. It felt like I had both the brakes and the gas on at the same time. There was something holding me back. That something came when I got mad. Actually, I got desperate. I'd been doing all the things I thought a writer should do. For going on 2 years, I'd shown up at what had become my seat in the Vancouver Public Library every weekday at 10 a.m., writing endless drafts until 2 or 3 or 4 every afternoon. And I'd written shit. Pardon me, there's construction worker language in this piece. Why couldn't I write the damn book? Then some wiser part of me remembered a creative writing class at UBC where I'd had this problem of a fictional character taking off on me and my personal terror at losing control of her. She was fictional, wasn't she? My teacher, Keith Millard, had seemed remarkably calm. Just keep writing, he'd said. See where it goes. You don't have to show it to anyone. And in front of the whole class, he had me do that old Gestalt therapy exercise. And probably it's only the older ones among us who even remember the old Gestalt therapy exercise of sitting your character in one chair, you in the other, and talking to each other. I only did it for a few minutes in class, though it felt like hours. And then I wept all the way home. It was a sure sign I was onto something. But what? So, sitting in the Vancouver Public Library, I now used that same Gestalt therapy trick and put my block, whatever was stopping me from writing, into the chair opposite. Then, looking just like a serious writer, dutiful scribe, I kept typing and interviewed my block. I wrote it all down. First, I asked it, who or what are you? After a few seconds, it said, my name is Fear. I wrote it down. I'd already figured out that I was afraid of having to relive some of the darker moments I'd lived in construction. But somehow this fear was not what I'd expected. I said, you're big. And it replied, so? You would be too, bloated as hell if you'd had to hold on to as much as I have for as long. Why the bloody hell have you waited so long? I was amazed. Fear as persona was angry, though angry was an understatement. When I tried to tell it how hard it had been for me to write this book, Fear yelled at me in capital letters, and it talked like a construction worker. Stop being so goddamn timid. You think it's going to kill you to remember something? They're only thoughts, for Christ's sake. So we began to talk. The conversation went like this. Fear. Sorry I yelled, but Christ, okay, how are we going to do this so I can finally get on with other things? What the heck do you need? Kate, help. Fear. But you're bursting to tell. What's holding you back? What are you afraid of? Kate, I'm afraid I'll explode with anger, dissolve in tears, find things to regret, wish I'd done things differently. Fear. There must be a way. Long pause while we both quiet down. Kate, what if I had someone to protect me? Another long pause. Even you. Very long pause. Fear. No one ever asked me to help them before. Fear seemed suddenly calmer and less fearful. From that moment, although I didn't realize it at the time, fear became my companion rather than my foe, and the book began to be written in earnest. Every time I felt stuck, every time I felt that familiar black plug of silence settling again in my throat, I called for fear, sometimes out loud. Fear was bigger than any of them. Fear was my champion. And on I'd write, cowered behind its huge, rough back. And I must say, if you do read the acknowledgements in that book, Journeywoman, I do thank fear for getting me through. And I will read, this is my most recent book as of this week, but my most recent poetry book is Elemental, and I'll read you a poem from that, and then maybe one from my next book. This is, Elemental is in 5 sections, one for each of the elements. And of course, as a carpenter, I had to make wood one of the elements, so. But this comes, excuse me, from the earth section. And it's called The Door to Rock. And it has an epigraph from Russell Thornton, who wrote a poem called The Oldest Rock in the World. And Russell said, "The door's in us so closed, we think the door to rock is shut." These 3 massive rocks, moss-covered, that you so carelessly sat upon for lunch, hadn't even asked them to be your chair, your table, sandwiches spread, suddenly vibrate alive. They shake in your seeing and shine, 3 divinities sunk in velvet earth, courtiers of green trees bending over in slow conference. How could there be such majesty? You didn't know, not even suspect. Now your knees are weak with wanting to fall. Give rock its due. Prostrate yourself before inconceivable age, inconceivable wisdom. But instead, you turn with the others, foolish human, and walk as directed into the hall, where you will sit, shimmering, your hands open, because now you know. And I'll finish with a poem from my next book. It's funny that I read the rock poem because a couple of years ago when we were in France visiting our family there, I was stunned by the beauty of the cathedrals, the construction of the cathedrals. 1,000 years old and 1,000 feet high, huge blocks, all of it built without machinery, with human labor and human ingenuity. And then I started, you know how this works, I started getting this voice in my head of a woman mason in the Middle Ages, a person who had built that kind of work. And when I came home, I realized I've been writing poems about rocks for years. So it's just allowed me to pursue. It's funny, over time, how you see patterns, I think, in your writing. So this is from that book. It'll be called something like Rock and Stone, Memoirs of a Medieval Woman Mason. And the story of it will be that my Mason was working in Middle Ages for a priest. She was his housekeeper, but he was abusing her. And finally, she gets so angry that she hits back and hurts him, draws blood. And when she runs home, her mother says, "You can't stay. You cannot hurt the priest." So her mother cuts off her hair and gives her a pair of her father's coveralls, and she has to go off and make a living for herself. And part of the story, and it works out in poems, how she became a Mason. But she's an apprentice now, and the Master Mason was not only the head of a job for years building these cathedrals, but was probably the most respected person in the community. So a very important character in her life. So she's now learning to carve. The poem's called Detail. Master says it over and over. The figure's clothing, drapery of their dress, angel's wings, devil's eyes, the blessing fingers. When people sit in their pews, Master says, perhaps not sure what the priest is saying, still, always they must know when they raise their eyes to your carving, they must recognize the stories there in their hearts. They must feel fear, he says, when they gaze on devils, and love and relief and gratitude when they see the grace of God and Mary and the angels. I only realize my eyes are wide and my mouth has fallen open when he turns to go. How is it that I know exactly what he is saying? Why is it so important? Now, if only my poor skills were greater, I shall work and carve and meditate until it is so. I shall do it for the glory and honor of stone. Thank you.